The knife came out of nowhere, and Cade Ashcroft caught the wrist before the blade could reach his throat. The attacker gasped, more from shock than pain, as the king of the Ashcroft pack twisted the weapon free with a single, practiced motion. It clattered to the marble floor of the private study, spinning once before it stopped. Cade did not raise his voice. He did not call the guards. He simply looked at the young wolf kneeling before him, a member of his own council staff, and asked one quiet question. "Who sent you?" The answer never came. The young man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, foam gathering at the corner of his mouth. Poison, self-administered, meant to silence him before he could confess. Cade stood over the body for a long moment, feeling nothing but a tired, familiar weight settle deeper into his chest. This was the fourth attempt in 3 years. Each one traced back to nothing. Each one left him more certain that somewhere inside his own walls, someone wanted him gone, and wanted it quietly. He called for the guards then, his voice flat and controlled, the voice of a king who had long ago stopped expecting anyone to protect him. As 2 soldiers dragged the body away, Cade sat down behind his desk and stared at the drop of blood on the floor where the knife had first fallen. 3 years since his mate had died on what should have been the happiest night of his life. 3 years of council meetings, treaties, border disputes, and men who smiled to his face while something colder moved behind their eyes. He had sworn, standing over Lyra's grave, that he would never again let himself be that open, that unguarded, that trusting. A king who loved was a king who could be destroyed through the person he loved. He intended to make himself impossible to destroy that way. If that meant ruling alone, cold and untouchable, then so be it. The guards returned an hour later with grim faces. The young attacker's family had been questioned. They knew nothing. His room held no letters, no names, nothing but a single silver coin with no markings, tucked beneath his pillow. It was the same kind of coin found after the second attempt, and the guards had kept that detail from the wider council, on Cade's direct order. Someone close to the throne was paying for his death, and paying in a currency that could not be traced. Cade dismissed the guards and sat alone as the candles burned low. Outside his window, the pack's lands stretched toward the horizon, forests dark and quiet under a sky heavy with clouds. He thought of Lyra's laugh, how it used to fill this very room before it was stolen from him. He thought of how easily grief could turn into armor, and how comfortable that armor had become. A soft knock broke the silence. It was late for anyone to be approaching the king's private study, and later still for anyone from the lower staff to be doing so. Cade straightened, his hand instinctively moving toward the blade at his hip, old habits sharpened by attempts on his life. But when the door opened, it was not an assassin. It was a young woman in a plain kitchen uniform, holding a tray with trembling hands. She was pale, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, her eyes wide with the particular fear of someone who had clearly been sent to do a job she did not want. Behind her, an older servant hovered nervously in the hallway, refusing to step past the threshold. "The regular attendant fell ill, my lord," the young woman said quietly. "I was told to bring your evening meal." Cade studied her for a moment. He did not recognize her, which was not unusual. There were hundreds of staff in the palace, and he made a point of knowing as few of them personally as possible. Attachment was a weakness he could not afford. He gestured toward the small table near the window, and she moved to set the tray down, careful not to let the dishes rattle. Her name, though he did not ask for it that night, was Wren Hollis. She had worked in the palace kitchens for 2 years, invisible in the way that people become invisible when no one bothers to look at them twice. She had no family standing, no pack lineage worth mentioning, and by all accounts, no reason to ever cross paths with the king of the realm she served. As she straightened after setting down the tray, her eyes briefly met his. Most servants looked away immediately, trained by fear and protocol to avoid direct eye contact with the Alpha King. Wren did not look away quickly enough, and in that brief moment, Cade saw something unexpected in her expression. Not fear, though there was some of that. Something gentler. Concern, perhaps, though he could not imagine what she had to be concerned about, standing in the presence of a man rumored to have grown as cold as the northern winters. "You look tired, my lord," she said, and then seemed to catch herself, pressing her lips together as if she had said something forbidden. Cade almost laughed. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared comment on his appearance, his mood, his exhaustion. His counsel spoke to him in careful, measured tones designed to avoid offense. His guards spoke only when necessary. Even the healers who checked on him after each attempt on his life chose their words as though walking across thin ice. "I am the king," he said, his voice cool. "Tiredness is not a luxury I am permitted." "Everyone is permitted to be tired," Wren said, quieter this time, though she still did not look away. "Even kings." For a moment, Cade said nothing. He should have dismissed her. He should have reminded her of her place, reminded himself of the walls he had built so carefully around every part of his life. Instead, he found himself watching her face, waiting to see if she would say anything else. She did not. She gave a small, hesitant bow and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "I am sorry about what happened tonight, my lord," she said. "Word travels fast in the kitchens. I hope you are not hurt." Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Cade alone with his cooling meal and a strange, unfamiliar feeling settling in his chest. It was not attraction, not yet, not something he could name so easily. It was simply the sensation of being seen, truly seen, by someone who expected nothing from him in return. He ate in silence, replaying the brief exchange in his mind more times than he cared to admit. When he finally rose to retire for the night, he found himself glancing toward the door, half expecting, half hoping, that she might return. She did not. The following morning, the council convened early, called by Cade's own order. 12 advisors sat around the long table in the throne hall, faces carefully arranged into expressions of concern and loyalty that Cade had learned, over the years, to distrust almost universally. At the head of the group sat Beta Roth, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, the most senior advisor in the room, and the man who had served Cade's father before him. "Another attempt," Roth said gravely, shaking his head. "This is unacceptable. The kingdom cannot function if its king is not safe within his own walls." Cade watched him carefully, the way he watched everyone these days. Roth's concern seemed genuine, his anger appropriately measured, his suggestions for tightened security reasonable and well considered, and yet something in the way Roth's eyes moved across the room, cataloging reactions, weighing responses, made Cade's instincts prickle with quiet unease. He had felt that same unease many times before, and each time, he had found no proof to justify it. "We increased the guard rotation," Cade said finally, "and I want every member of staff who has joined the palace in the last 5 years reinvestigated. Quietly. I do not want panic spreading through the lower halls." The council murmured agreement, and the meeting continued through matters of trade routes, border tensions with the neighboring Hallowpack, and a request for tax relief from villages hit hard by the recent harvest failures. Cade handled each matter with the same detached efficiency he brought to everything, his mind sharp even as exhaustion pulled at the edges of his focus. It was well past midday before the council dispersed, and Cade found himself walking the long corridor back toward his private chambers, trailed by 2 guards who kept a respectful distance. As he passed the kitchens, a burst of laughter drifted through the open doorway, quickly hushed as the staff noticed him approaching. He slowed, though he could not say why, his eyes moving briefly over the room before he caught himself and continued on. He told himself it was simply curiosity. A king had every right to be aware of the goings-on within his own palace, down to the smallest details. It had nothing to do with searching for a particular braid of dark hair among the kitchen staff, nothing to do with wondering whether she had noticed him pass. That evening, the same illness that had struck down the regular attendant kept the position unfilled again, and once more, a tray arrived at his study door carried by careful, familiar hands. Wren entered with less hesitation this time, though she still kept her eyes lowered as she crossed the room. "You again," Cade said, and immediately regretted how it sounded, as though he were displeased by her presence rather than the opposite. "I can send someone else, my lord, if you prefer," she said quickly, setting down the tray. "No," he said, too fast, and then steadied his voice. "It is fine." She lingered a moment longer than necessary, straightening the dishes though they required no straightening. Cade watched her hands, small and quick, and found himself searching for something to say that would keep her in the room a little longer, some question that would not sound as strange to her ears as it did in his own mind. "How long have you worked here?" he asked finally. 2 years, my lord," she answered, glancing up briefly. "I keep to the kitchens, mostly. I am not accustomed to speaking with anyone above stairs." "Yet you spoke to me last night," he said. A faint color rose in her cheeks, and she looked down again. "I should not have. Forgive me if I overstepped." "You did not overstep," Cade said, surprising himself with the certainty in his own voice. Something shifted in her expression then, a small, careful softening, and for the briefest moment, she smiled. It was not a large smile, not bold or performative like the smiles his courtiers wore when currying favor. It was small and genuine, the kind of smile that came from someone with nothing to gain and nothing to hide. Cade felt something crack quietly in his chest, some old, frozen thing shifting for the first time in years. He did not understand it, and he did not trust it, but he could not deny that it had happened. "Thank you for the meal," he said, his voice quieter now. Wren bowed and left without another word, and Cade sat alone in the growing dark, staring at the door long after it had closed, wondering why a simple smile from a forgotten kitchen Omega had unsettled him more than 4 attempts on his life ever had. The scream from the eastern garden shattered the quiet of the afternoon, and every guard within earshot moved at once. Cade reached the garden first, cutting through a hedge rather than following the path, his heart pounding with a fear he had not felt in years. He found Wren pressed against the stone wall near the fountain, staring at the still body of a palace cat, its fur matted with something dark and unnatural. She was shaking, one hand pressed to her mouth, but she was unharmed. "What happened?" Cade demanded, scanning the garden for any sign of threat. "I do not know, my lord," Wren said, her voice unsteady. "I was walking through to deliver linens when I found it like this. It was moving strangely before it died, foaming, twitching." Cade knelt beside the animal, careful not to touch it directly. The smell reached him a moment later, faint but unmistakable, a poison he recognized from the assassin's body weeks earlier. Someone had left this here, in a garden frequented mostly by staff, and Wren had been the one to stumble upon it. He could not decide if it was coincidence or something far more deliberate. He ordered the area sealed off immediately, guards posted at every entrance, and the body taken for examination by the palace healer. When the commotion settled and the garden emptied of soldiers, Cade remained, along with Wren, who seemed unwilling to leave despite the fear still visible in her posture. "You should not be here alone anymore," he said, more to himself than to her. "I have nowhere else to be, my lord," Wren answered. "My duties bring me through this garden most days." "Then your duties will change," Cade said firmly. Wren looked up at him, surprised. "My lord, I do not understand. Why would my duties concern you?" Cade did not have a ready answer, not one he was willing to voice aloud. In the weeks since that first evening in his study, he had found excuses to see her more often than he cared to admit. He requested tea brought to his private chambers at odd hours, knowing the task often fell to her when the senior staff were occupied elsewhere. He walked past the kitchens more frequently than any king with actual business in that part of the palace should. He told himself each time that it meant nothing, that he was simply a man curious about the only person in his household who spoke to him without calculation or fear. But watching her tremble beside a poisoned animal in his own garden, Cade understood with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that his interest had grown into something far more dangerous than curiosity. "Because someone is targeting this palace, and I will not have an innocent caught in the crossfire," he said finally, choosing the safer truth over the fuller one. Wren studied him for a long moment, and Cade had the distinct sense that she saw straight through his careful deflection, though she said nothing to challenge it. "Thank you, my lord," she said instead, softly. That evening, Cade summoned his personal guard captain, a steady, loyal wolf named Owen who had served since Cade's father's reign. He instructed Owen to quietly reassign Wren Hollis to duties within the main kitchen only, away from the gardens and outer corridors where an attacker might find easier access. He gave no explanation beyond general security concerns, and Owen, wisely, did not ask for one. Word of the poisoned animal spread quickly through the lower staff, whispered between servants who had learned over the years to fear anything unusual within the palace walls. Fear settled over the kitchens like a fog, and Cade found himself, against every instinct of caution he had cultivated over 3 long years, wanting to ease that fear rather than ignore it. He began visiting the kitchens directly, an unprecedented act for a king who had spent years distancing himself from every corner of ordinary palace life. His presence caused a ripple of nervous energy each time, staff bowing too deeply, voices dropping to careful murmurs. But Wren treated him with the same steady, unguarded honesty she had shown from their first meeting. "You are frightening the staff, my lord," she told him once, only half joking, as he stood awkwardly near the ovens while she prepared bread for the evening meal. "I am simply ensuring the kitchens remain secure," he said. Wren gave him a look that suggested she did not believe him for a moment, but she said nothing further, only continued her work with practiced efficiency. Cade found himself watching the movement of her hands, the quiet focus in her expression, the small smile that occasionally crossed her face when one of the younger kitchen staff made a joke or fumbled a task. It became a pattern over the following days. Cade would find some excuse, a report to deliver personally, a question about supplies, anything that justified his presence, and he would linger longer than any excuse required. Wren never questioned it aloud, though he suspected she understood far more than she let on. One evening, as autumn rain hammered against the kitchen windows, Cade arrived later than usual, his expression carrying the particular exhaustion that followed a long council session about the Hallowpack's increasingly aggressive border movements. Most of the kitchen staff had already retired for the night, leaving Wren alone, finishing preparations for the following morning's meals. Long day, my lord, she observed, setting aside her work. The Hallow Pack grows bolder each season, Cade said, sinking into a chair near the hearth without quite meaning to. Their Alpha believes our recent losses have weakened us enough to test our borders. Have they? Ren asked. Weakened you, I mean. Cade considered the question longer than he expected to. No one asked him such direct questions anymore. Not his council, not his guards, no one except the young woman standing before him in a simple kitchen uniform, flowers still dusting her hands. Perhaps, he admitted quietly, 3 years of grief does not strengthen a kingdom. Ren was quiet for a moment, and Cade wondered if he had said too much, revealed too much of the fracture beneath his careful composure. But when she spoke, her voice held no pity, only a gentle, steady understanding that struck him more deeply than sympathy ever could have. Grief does not have to be a weakness, my lord, she said. Sometimes it simply means you loved deeply enough to feel its absence just as deeply. That is not the same as being broken. Cade looked at her then, truly looked, and felt the last of his careful defenses waver. How is it, he asked quietly, that a woman with no pack, no standing, no reason to know anything of grief or kingship, speaks with more wisdom than every advisor who sits at my council table? Ren's expression flickered, something guarded passing briefly behind her eyes before she masked it with a small, deflecting smile. Perhaps forgotten people learn to see things that important people overlook, she said. The words carried a weight Cade did not fully understand at the time, a hint of some deeper truth she was not yet ready to share. He did not press her further that night, though the phrase lingered in his mind long after he returned to his empty chambers. Over the following week, the investigation into the poisoned garden yielded little. The healer confirmed the substance matched the poison found on the failed assassin weeks earlier, strengthening Cade's suspicion that both incidents traced back to the same source, someone with access to rare, untraceable substances and enough influence to move through the palace unnoticed. Guard Captain Owen expanded his quiet inquiries, focusing now on senior staff and council members rather than the lower ranks, though he cautioned Cade against acting without solid proof. Whoever is responsible has been patient for years, Owen told him during a private briefing. They will not make a careless mistake now. We must be patient as well, and careful. Cade agreed, though patience had never come easily to him, and grew more difficult with each passing day that Ren remained within a palace that clearly harbored a hidden threat. He found himself assigning additional guards near the kitchens, a decision that raised quiet questions among his council, but one he refused to explain or reconsider. Beta Roth approached him privately after one council session, his expression carrying practiced concern. You seem distracted lately, my king, he said. Is something troubling you beyond the usual matters of state? Nothing beyond the ordinary demands of the crown, Cade answered smoothly, though he studied Roth's face carefully as he spoke, searching for anything beneath the surface concern. Roth held his gaze a moment longer than necessary before nodding and taking his leave, and Cade found himself, not for the first time, wondering exactly how much his oldest advisor truly knew about the shadows moving through the palace. That night, unable to sleep, Cade walked the quiet corridors alone, his mind circling between the unresolved threat against his life and the strange, unwelcome warmth that had settled into his chest whenever he thought of Ren's small, steady smile. He told himself repeatedly that he could not afford either distraction, that a king consumed by grief and threatened by hidden enemies had no room left for anything resembling hope. Yet as he passed the darkened kitchens and saw a single candle still burning within, he found his feet carrying him toward the light rather than away from it. Some quiet, persistent part of him, no longer willing to pretend that the forgotten Omega's presence in his life meant nothing at all. The report landed on Cade's desk with a soft thud, and he stared at it for a long moment before allowing himself to open it. He had asked Owen to look into Ren's background quietly, telling himself it was a simple security measure, nothing more than the diligence any king should apply to those given repeated access to his private chambers. He told himself this even as his pulse quickened at the thought of learning something true about her, something beyond the careful, guarded fragments she offered in conversation. The file was thinner than he expected. Ren Hollis, age 23, arrived at the palace 2 years earlier with a letter of recommendation from a small village near the southern border, a letter that, upon closer inspection, Owen's inquiries had failed to verify through any official channel. No family listed, no birth registration found in the village she claimed to be from, no trace of her existence before the day she walked through the palace gates seeking kitchen work. Cade read the report twice, a strange unease settling over him. It was not uncommon for orphaned wolves or Omegas without packs standing to arrive with incomplete records, especially in the chaotic years following the border conflicts of the previous decade. Many such records were simply lost, destroyed, or never properly kept in the first place. Yet something about the complete absence of any trace troubled him more than he expected. "Should we bring her in for questioning, my lord?" Owen asked, standing at attention across the desk. "No," Cade said, perhaps too quickly. "Not yet. I do not believe she poses a threat." Owen hesitated. "My lord, with respect, we cannot know that with certainty. The timing of her arrival, so close to the Queen's death, and her sudden proximity to you now, it could be coincidence, but a king in your position cannot afford blind trust." Cade knew the guard captain was right, knew that every instinct trained into him over years of rule should have demanded suspicion rather than the strange protective impulse that rose in him instead. Yet when he pictured Wren's face, the quiet steadiness in her eyes, the small smile that never seemed calculated or false, he could not make himself believe she meant him harm. "Continue the investigation quietly," he said finally, "but do not approach her directly. I will handle this myself." Owen nodded, though his expression remained troubled as he took his leave, and Cade sat alone with the thin file for a long while afterward, turning the mystery over in his mind without arriving at any comfortable answer. That evening, he found Wren in the kitchen garden, a smaller, enclosed space near the eastern wall, where herbs grew for the palace's daily meals. She knelt among the rows, carefully gathering rosemary into a woven basket, unaware of his approach until he was nearly beside her. "My lord," she said, startled, rising quickly and brushing dirt from her apron. "I did not expect you here." "I find myself drawn to unexpected places lately," Cade said, and watched a faint blush color her cheeks before she looked away. They walked together along the garden path, an easy silence settling between them that Cade had not experienced with another person in longer than he cared to admit. He wanted to ask her directly about her past, about the missing records, the absent family, the letter that led nowhere when traced. Yet something in him hesitated, unwilling to shatter the fragile trust that had grown between them with the weight of suspicion. Instead, he asked a gentler question. "Tell me about your village, before the palace." Wren's steps slowed slightly, and for a moment, Cade thought she might refuse to answer entirely. "It was small," she said finally, her voice careful, quiet. "Not much to tell, my lord. I lost my family young and made my way here when I was old enough to work." "How young?" Cade pressed gently. "Young enough that I remember very little of it clearly," she said, and there was something in her tone, a practiced smoothness, that told Cade she had answered this question many times before, to many different people, with the same careful evasion each time. He did not press further, though the unanswered questions settled uncomfortably in his chest. They continued walking, and eventually, the conversation drifted toward safer subjects, the coming harvest festival, the strange behavior of the palace cat since the poisoning incident, small, ordinary things that allowed both of them to relax into something resembling normal conversation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Wren paused near the eastern wall, looking out over the darkening tree line beyond the palace grounds. "Do you ever wish you could simply leave all of this behind, my lord?" she asked quietly. "The crown, the council, the weight of it all." "Every day," Cade admitted, surprising himself with his own honesty. "But a king does not have the luxury of walking away from his people, whatever the cost to himself." "And if you were not a king?" she asked, turning to look at him directly. "If you were simply a man, what would you want?" Cade considered the question longer than perhaps he should have. "To be known," he said finally, quietly. "Not for my crown, not for my title, but simply as myself. It has been a long time since anyone looked at me and saw only a man, rather than a king or a widower or a target." Wren's expression softened, something vulnerable passing behind her careful composure. "I see a man, my lord," she said softly. "I have from the beginning." The words settled over Cade like warmth spreading through a cold room, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, the space between them charged with something neither seemed ready to name aloud. Then Wren stepped back, breaking the moment with a small, apologetic smile, and the garden returned to its ordinary quiet. "I should return to my duties, my lord," she said. "The evening meal will not prepare itself." Cade nodded, though he found himself reluctant to let her go. As she turned to leave, he spoke again, unable to hold back the question any longer. "Wren," he said, and she paused, looking back at him. "If there were things in your past you could not speak of, would you tell me, if I asked directly?" Something flickered across her face, quick and guarded, gone before Cade could fully read it. "I would tell you what I could, my lord," she said carefully. "But some truths are not mine alone to share. Some truths protect others as much as myself." She left before he could ask what she meant, and Cade stood alone in the darkening garden, turning her words over in his mind. It was not a denial, not exactly, but it was not the reassurance he had hoped for either. Whatever she was hiding, it was deliberate, protected not out of malice but out of some deeper necessity he did not yet understand. Later that night, Owen returned with an additional piece of information, delivered with visible unease. "My lord," he said, "I found something. The village Wren claims as her origin, the one destroyed by fever 15 years ago, according to the official record. That village never existed under that name in any registry before or after that date. It appears to have been fabricated for her recommendation letter." Cade felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Then who forged the letter, and why?" he asked. "I do not know yet, my lord," Owen admitted. "But whoever did so had considerable resources and connections to make it convincing enough to pass initial inspection. This was not the work of an ordinary forger." Cade dismissed Owen and sat alone long into the night, the mystery of Wren Hollis pressing heavily against the fragile trust that had begun to grow between them. He did not believe she meant him harm, could not make himself believe it despite every rational instinct urging caution. Yet the deliberate construction of a false past suggested someone with far greater resources than a simple orphaned kitchen worker, someone who had gone to great lengths to hide the truth of who she truly was. He thought of her words in the garden, "Some truths protect others as much as myself," and wondered, with a growing sense of unease and fascination in equal measure, exactly what secret could be significant enough to require such an elaborate, carefully maintained disguise. Lightning split the sky over the palace the night Cade finally allowed himself to remember everything about the day Lyra died. He had avoided this memory deliberately for 3 years, burying it beneath duty and distance. But Wren's quiet questions in the garden had loosened something he could no longer keep buried. He sat alone in his chambers, rain hammering the windows, and let the memory return in full. It had been their wedding night. The celebrations had lasted until nearly midnight, the great hall filled with music and firelight. Wolves from every corner of the kingdom gathered to witness the union of their king, with a woman he had loved since childhood. Lyra had worn a gown the color of autumn leaves, her laughter bright and unguarded as she danced among their guests, and Cade remembered thinking, in that single golden moment, that nothing could ever touch the happiness he felt. He had left her briefly, called away by a minor matter regarding the guard rotation for the evening, a task so mundane he barely remembered the details now. When he returned to their private chambers less than an hour later, he found her already gone, the room disturbed, a single window left open to the cold night air. By the time the search parties found her, deep in the forest bordering the Northern Territory, it was already too late. She had been struck down cleanly, efficiently, by someone who clearly knew the layout of the palace grounds, and the exact moment she would be unguarded. No suspect was ever found. No motive was ever confirmed. The investigation, led at the time by then Junior Officer Owen, uncovered only fragments, a torn piece of unfamiliar fabric, a set of footprints that vanished at the tree line, and the same unmarked silver coin that would later appear beside each subsequent attempt on Cade's own life. He had blamed himself endlessly in the months that followed, replaying that single choice to leave her alone, however briefly, however necessary the reason had seemed at the time. Grief had calcified into something harder over the following years, a protective shell he built layer by layer until he no longer recognized the man who had danced with such open joy on his wedding night. Cade rose from his chair and crossed to the window, watching the storm rage over the dark grounds below. He thought of Beta Roth, who had comforted him in those early weeks of grief with practiced, careful words, who had taken on additional responsibilities within the council to ease Cade's burden during his darkest period, who had never once been formally suspected despite Cade's own quiet, persistent unease regarding the man's true motives. He had no proof against Roth, nothing beyond instinct and a discomfort he could not fully articulate even to himself. Yet something about the timing troubled him now in ways it never had before. Roth had gained significant influence over palace affairs in the aftermath of Lyra's death, consolidating relationships with council members who might otherwise have challenged his authority, quietly expanding his reach into matters of trade and border security that had once fallen under Cade's direct oversight. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and Cade turned to find Owen standing in the doorway, his expression grave even in the dim candlelight. "My lord, forgive the late hour," Owen said, stepping inside. "I have information you should hear immediately." Cade gestured for him to continue, bracing himself for whatever news had brought his guard captain to his private chambers so late into the storm. "I have been reviewing the old records from the Queen's death, alongside the recent attempts on your life," Owen said carefully. "The silver coins found at each scene, I traced the metal composition to a mine controlled exclusively by one noble family within our territory." Cade's chest tightened. "Which family?" he asked. though some part of him already suspected the answer. "The Roth family holdings, my lord," Owen said quietly. "Specifically, mines under the direct control of Beta Roth's younger brother, who manages the family estates while Roth serves on your council." Cade absorbed this information slowly, feeling the careful foundation of years spent trusting his father's oldest advisor crack beneath the weight of quiet, damning evidence. "It is not proof of Roth's direct involvement," he said finally, his voice controlled despite the storm building within him. "The coins could have been stolen, sold, passed through many hands before reaching whoever planted them." "That is true, my lord," Owen agreed. "But combined with the timing of his rise to influence following the Queen's death, and his consistent presence near matters that seem designed to keep you distracted from deeper investigation, I believe we must consider him a serious suspect, however painful that possibility may be." Cade closed his eyes briefly, the weight of years settling over him. Roth had been present at nearly every major decision since Lyra's death, had guided Cade through grief with what appeared to be genuine care, had never once raised suspicion despite Cade's own quiet unease. If Owen's theory proved correct, it meant the betrayal ran deeper and closer than Cade had ever allowed himself to consider. "We proceed carefully," Cade said finally. "I want surveillance on Roth's movements, quietly, without alerting him or the wider council. No accusations, no confrontations, until we have proof substantial enough to act upon, without dividing the kingdom through false suspicion." Owen nodded, understanding the delicate balance required. "And regarding the Omega, my lord," he asked carefully, "given what we now suspect about Roth's potential involvement in the Queen's death, should we consider whether Ren Hollis's arrival, so soon after, might be connected somehow?" Cade had considered this possibility already, turning it over during many sleepless hours. Yet something in him resisted the conclusion entirely. "She has been nothing but transparent in her manner, if not her history," he said. "I do not believe she serves Roth's interests, whatever her hidden past may involve." "Forgive me, my lord," Owen said gently, "but transparency in manner does not guarantee truth in origin. I only urge caution, given how much is at stake." Cade dismissed him shortly after, alone once more with the storm and the weight of suspicion pressing against every relationship he had trusted for years. He thought of Roth's steady counsel through the darkest period of his life, wondering now whether that comfort had been genuine or calculated, a slow, patient manipulation designed to secure influence while Cade remained too consumed by grief to notice. He thought too of Ren, her guarded past, her careful evasions, the fabricated village that existed nowhere in official record. Yet even considering every reason for suspicion, he found himself unable to believe she meant him harm. Perhaps that inability itself was dangerous, a king allowing personal feeling to cloud necessary caution. Yet something in her eyes, in the quiet honesty of her presence, felt entirely separate from the calculated coldness he now recognized might be hiding behind Roth's familiar, trusted face. The storm continued through the night, and Cade remained awake long past midnight, so caught between grief for a wife he could not save, and a cautious, uncertain hope for a future he had sworn, standing over her grave, he would never allow himself to want again. Nora Pell had kept the secret for 18 years, and the night she finally decided to break her silence, the storm outside her cottage seemed to shake the very foundations of everything she had built to protect the girl she loved as her own daughter. Nora had once served as a guard within the Hallow Pack's royal household, before that pack was destroyed in a brutal conflict that wiped out nearly every member of its ruling family. She remembered the night clearly, the flames consuming the eastern hall, the screams of a household caught unprepared by an enemy force that struck without warning or mercy. She remembered, too, the moment she found a small child hidden beneath the floorboards of the nursery, silent and trembling, the only survivor of a lineage meant to end that night entirely. That child had been Ren. Nora had made a choice in that burning hall that would shape the rest of both their lives. She fled with the girl through the forest, changed her name, fabricated a history, and eventually settled in a quiet village far from anyone who might recognize the last surviving heir of the Hallow royal line. She raised Ren as her own niece, teaching her caution above all else, teaching her that survival meant remaining invisible, unremarkable, forgotten by a world that would kill her instantly if her true identity were ever discovered. When Nora fell too ill to continue working the small farm that had sustained them for years, she had encouraged Ren to seek work within the Ashcroft Palace kitchens, believing the anonymity of a large royal household would offer better protection than the exposed vulnerability of their small village. She had not anticipated that the very king Ren would serve might one day come to care for her, nor had she anticipated how dangerous that unexpected outcome could become for everyone involved. Now, with her health failing rapidly, and death approaching faster than she had prepared for, Nora understood she could no longer carry this secret alone. She sent word through a trusted messenger, requesting Ren return to the village immediately. The urgency in her message clear enough that Ren arrived within 2 days, breathless and worried, having requested emergency leave from her palace duties. "Aunt Nora," Ren said, kneeling beside the bed where Nora lay, pale and weakened by the illness that had taken hold of her lungs. "What is it? Your message frightened me." Nora took her hand, feeling the familiar strength in Ren's grip, the same strength she had recognized even in the frightened child she had carried from that burning hall so many years ago. "There is something I must tell you, child," she said, her voice weaker than Ren had ever heard it. "Something I should have told you long before now, but feared the telling itself might endanger you." Ren's expression grew serious, sensing the gravity in Nora's tone. "Tell me," she said softly. And so Nora told her everything. The burning hall, the nursery, the small child hidden beneath the floorboards while her family was slaughtered above. She told Ren of her true parentage, the Hallow royal bloodline, the enemies who had believed the entire lineage extinguished that night, and the careful, desperate deception that had kept her hidden and safe for 18 years since. Ren sat in stunned silence as the story unfolded, memories she had always dismissed as childhood nightmares suddenly taking on terrible new clarity. The flames, the screaming, a woman's voice calling her name before the world went dark and silent beneath the floorboards. She had always believed these memories belonged to fever dreams, imagined horrors invented by a child's overactive mind. Now she understood they were true, fragments of the worst night of her life, resurfacing with devastating clarity. "I am the last of the Hallow line," she said quietly, testing the words as though they belonged to someone else entirely. "You are," Nora confirmed, "and that truth makes you far more valuable, and far more dangerous, to certain people than you have ever realized. The Hallow Pack's destruction was never fully explained, child. Rumors persisted for years that someone within our own household orchestrated the attack, someone seeking to claim our territory and resources for themselves." "Who?" Ren asked, her voice tight with a mixture of grief and fury she had not expected to feel for a family she barely remembered. "I never knew for certain," Nora admitted, "but I always suspected the attack was arranged by someone with connections beyond our own pack, someone patient enough to wait years for the right opportunity to strike, and ruthless enough to eliminate an entire bloodline to secure whatever advantage they sought." Ren absorbed this information slowly, her mind racing through implications she had not yet fully processed. "Aunt Nora," she said carefully, "I have grown close to someone at the palace, the king himself. If what you say is true, if there are still people who wish the Hallow line eliminated entirely, does my presence near him put us both in greater danger?" Nora's expression grew grave. "It very well might, child. If anyone discovers your true identity, they may fear that proximity to a king could restore influence or resources to the surviving Hallow bloodline, threatening whatever gains they secured through your family's destruction. You must be exceptionally careful who learns the truth of who you are." Ren remained with Nora through the following days, tending to her illness even as the older woman's condition continued to worsen. She thought constantly of Cade, of the questions he had begun asking about her past, the careful investigation she suspected he had already initiated given his position and understandable caution. She wondered how he would react if he learned the truth, whether he would see her as a genuine person he had come to care for, or merely as a political complication, a hidden heir whose existence threatened delicate balances of power he had spent years carefully maintaining. On the 4th night of her visit, Nora's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. Ren sat beside her through the night, holding her hand as her breathing grew increasingly labored, whispering reassurances she was not entirely certain she believed herself. "You have given me a good life, child," Nora whispered near dawn, her voice barely audible. "Whatever happens now, know that saving you from that burning hall was the single act I am most proud of in this entire life." "You saved more than my life," Ren said, tears finally breaking free as she pressed Nora's hand to her cheek. "You gave me a family when I had none left. You gave me everything." Nora passed peacefully as the sun rose over the quiet village, and Ren remained beside her for hours afterward, grief and fear tangling together into something she could barely process. She was alone now, truly alone, the last surviving heir of a destroyed royal line, carrying a secret that could endanger not only herself, but potentially the king she had come to care for more deeply than she had ever intended to allow. She returned to the palace 3 days later, having arranged for Nora's proper burial within the village they had called home for so many years. The journey back felt different now, heavier, every mile bringing her closer to a palace where she would have to continue hiding the truth of who she truly was, even as her feelings for the man who ruled that palace grew more difficult to contain. As she approached the palace gates, guards recognized her and allowed her through without question, unaware of the transformation that had taken place within her during her brief absence. She was no longer simply a forgotten kitchen Omega with no family and no history. She was the last heir of a murdered royal line, carrying secrets that could reshape the delicate political balance of the entire region if they were ever revealed. Cade found her later that evening, having heard through palace staff that she had returned from an emergency absence. He found her in the kitchen garden, staring at the herbs she had once tended so carefully, her expression distant and grief-stricken in ways he had never witnessed before. "Ren," he said gently, approaching carefully. "What happened? You look as though you have lost someone dear to you." "I have, my lord," she said quietly, not turning to face him immediately. "My aunt, the woman who raised me, she passed just days ago." Cade's expression softened with genuine sympathy, and he moved closer, resisting the urge to reach for her despite every instinct urging him to offer comfort. "I am deeply sorry for your loss," he said. "If there is anything within my power that might ease this grief, you have only to ask." Ren finally turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed but steady, and for a moment, Cade saw something new in her expression, a weight she carried, that went beyond simple grief for a lost guardian. "There is something I should tell you, my lord," she began, and then hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Cade waited, patient despite his own growing unease, sensing that whatever she was about to share carried significance far beyond ordinary conversation. But before Ren could continue, a guard approached hurriedly from the palace entrance, interrupting the moment with news that pulled both their attention immediately toward a crisis neither had anticipated. "My lord," the guard said, breathless from running. "Beta Roth requests your immediate presence. There has been a development regarding the border tensions with the Hallow territory that requires urgent attention." Cade glanced back at Ren, torn between the mystery she had begun to reveal and the demands of his crown. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "We will finish this conversation soon, I promise you." Ren nodded, though something in her expression suggested relief at the interruption as much as disappointment, the truth she had almost spoken still hanging unspoken between them as Cade departed toward whatever new crisis awaited him within the palace walls. The training yard fell completely silent the moment Cade drew his blade against Owen in an unscheduled sparring match, the sudden intensity in the king's movements startling every soldier who paused to watch. He had not slept properly in days, his mind fractured between suspicion toward Roth, unanswered questions about Ren's hidden past, and the persistent, unwelcome awareness of how deeply she had already settled into thoughts he had once reserved exclusively for grief. Physical exertion had always been his method of managing chaos he could not immediately resolve, and this morning, that chaos had reached a breaking point. "My lord," Owen said carefully, lowering his blade after their third exchange left both men breathing hard. "Something troubles you beyond matters of state security. I have served you long enough to recognize the difference." Cade sheathed his own blade, wiping sweat from his brow as he considered how much to reveal even to his most trusted guard captain. "It is nothing that concerns the security of the crown directly," he said finally. Owen's expression remained knowing despite Cade's deflection. "Forgive my presumption, my lord, but I believe the kitchen Omega concerns you a great deal, whether or not it relates directly to matters of security." Cade did not answer immediately, and his silence proved answer enough for Owen, who allowed himself a small, understanding smile rarely seen on his typically stern features. "You have not looked at another person the way you look at her since before the Queen's passing," Owen said quietly. "I do not say this as criticism, my lord. I say it because I believe you deserve happiness, whatever complications may accompany it." Cade considered his guard captain's words as they walked together back toward the palace, the morning sun burning away the last traces of overnight rain. He had spent 3 years convinced that happiness was a luxury denied to him permanently, that love itself had become synonymous with vulnerability and loss. Yet something about Ren's presence had begun dismantling that conviction piece by piece, despite every effort he made to resist it. That afternoon, he sought her out deliberately, finding her in the smaller dining hall reserved for staff meals, sitting alone near a window as autumn light filtered through the glass. She looked up as he entered, surprise flickering across her features, before settling into the careful warmth that had become familiar between them. "My lord," she said, beginning to rise, but Cade gestured for her to remain seated. "May I join you?" he asked, and something in his tone, uncertain in a way rarely heard from a king accustomed to commanding rather than requesting, seemed to soften whatever hesitation she carried. "Of course," she said, and he settled across from her, the simple domesticity of the moment feeling more comfortable than any council meeting he had attended in months. They spoke of small things at first, the coming harvest festival preparations, a particularly difficult batch of bread that had refused to rise properly that morning, the strange behavior of one of the palace hounds who had taken to following Wren through the corridors despite belonging officially to the stables. Cade found himself laughing genuinely, an unfamiliar sensation that seemed to surprise Wren as much as it surprised him. "You laugh so rarely, my lord," she observed softly. "I wonder sometimes what stole that from you so completely." "Grief has a way of consuming everything it touches," Cade admitted, the honesty coming more easily than he expected. "I convinced myself that laughter, joy, any form of lightness, belonged to a life I no longer had access to, until recently." Wren's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at her hands, though a small smile remained visible at the corner of her mouth. "What changed, my lord?" she asked quietly, though something in her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Cade considered deflecting, retreating into the safer distance he had maintained for years. Yet something about her steady presence, her willingness to sit with him without pretense or calculation, made honesty feel less dangerous than it once had. "You did," he said simply. The words settled between them, quiet and undeniable, and for a long moment neither spoke, the weight of unspoken feeling finally acknowledged openly rather than carefully avoided. Wren finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly, and Cade saw in her expression something that mirrored his own uncertain, fragile hope. "My lord," she began, her voice careful, "I am nothing. A kitchen worker with no family, no standing, no claim to anything beyond what I earned through my own labor. You are a king. Whatever this is between us, it cannot lead anywhere sensible." "Sense has very little to do with it," Cade said quietly. "I have ruled with careful logic for 3 years, weighing every decision against the good of my kingdom, denying myself anything resembling personal happiness because I believed it made me stronger, more untouchable. I am no longer certain that belief served me well." Wren's eyes glistened with emotion she seemed to be fighting to control. "There are things about me you do not know, my lord," she said carefully. "Things that complicate whatever this might become between us far more than simple questions of standing or family." "I know," Cade said gently, surprising her. "I know your history contains gaps, questions I have not pressed you to answer because I trust that whatever truth you carry, you will share it when you are ready, not before." Wren stared at him, something breaking open in her expression, relief and fear tangled together in equal measure. "You already suspect something," she said quietly. "I suspect very little with certainty," Cade admitted. "But I know enough to understand that whatever you carry is heavy, and I would rather wait for your trust than force truth from you before you are ready to give it freely." Wren reached across the table then, her hand covering his briefly, a small, tentative gesture that carried more weight than any declaration could have. "Thank you," she whispered, and Cade felt something in his chest loosen further, the careful armor he had built over 3 years cracking a little more with each moment spent in her presence. Their conversation continued through the afternoon, drifting between lighter subjects and quieter, more vulnerable admissions neither had shared with anyone else in years. Cade spoke, for the first time since Lyra's death, about the small joys of his early marriage, memories he had avoided entirely out of fear that revisiting them would deepen his grief beyond bearing. Instead, sharing them with Wren felt like releasing a weight rather than adding to it, the memories softening into something bittersweet rather than purely painful. Wren, in turn, spoke carefully around the edges of her own hidden history, sharing fragments of a childhood clouded by fire and fear without revealing the full truth she still felt unable to voice completely. She spoke of Nora's recent passing with fresh grief, of the strange, persistent feeling that her past carried dangers she did not yet fully understand. As evening approached and the dining hall began filling with staff arriving for their own meals, Cade reluctantly rose to return to his duties, aware that their extended conversation had already drawn curious glances from passing servants. Before he left, he paused, looking back at Wren with an openness he had not allowed himself in years. "Whatever your past holds," he said quietly, "I want you to know that it will not change how I see you now. You have given me something I believed I had lost forever, and I do not intend to let fear of the unknown take that away from either of us." Wren watched him leave, her heart aching with a mixture of hope and dread she could not fully separate. She wanted desperately to believe his words, to trust that whatever truth eventually surfaced about her identity would not shatter the fragile connection growing between them. Yet some quiet, persistent fear reminded her that kings rarely had the luxury of choosing love over political consequence, and that her true identity as the last heir of a murdered royal line carried consequences far beyond simple matters of the heart. That night, alone in her small quarters, Wren finally allowed herself to weep, grief for Nora tangling with fear for whatever future awaited her should the truth of her identity ever reach beyond the careful circle of trust she had maintained for so many years. She thought of Cade's steady eyes, his unexpected gentleness, the way he had chosen patience over suspicion despite every reasonable justification for the latter. Whatever came next, she understood that the careful, invisible life she had built for herself was ending, one way or another, and that the choice now facing her was whether to face that ending with honesty, or continue hiding within a deception that grew more dangerous with each passing day she remained close to the king who had somehow, against every expectation, begun to heal a heart she had believed permanently broken by loss. The council chamber erupted into hushed murmurs the moment Beta Roth accused Wren Hollis of endangering the crown, his voice carrying practiced outrage that immediately put Cade on guard. "She has been seen in private conversation with the king on numerous occasions," Roth declared, addressing the assembled council members with the confidence of a man certain of his own authority. "A kitchen servant, with no verified history, no family standing, no claim to trust beyond convenient timing. I ask this council, does this not concern anyone beyond myself?" Cade watched the reactions ripple across the table, several council members nodding cautiously in agreement, others glancing toward him uncertainly, unwilling to openly challenge Roth's authority, but equally hesitant to directly contradict their king. He had anticipated some form of resistance eventually, given how visibly his behavior had shifted over recent weeks, yet the directness of Roth's public challenge caught him slightly off guard. "The matter of my personal associations does not require council approval," Cade said evenly, though he felt the careful control in his own voice straining slightly. "With respect, my king," Roth continued, his tone shifting toward something more urgent, "we have suffered 4 attempts on your life within 3 years, alongside your queen's tragic murder. Given this pattern, is it not reasonable to scrutinize any new, unexplained presence that has gained sudden proximity to you?" Cade met Roth's gaze directly, searching for any sign of the deeper motivation Owen's investigation suggested might lie beneath this concern. "If you have specific evidence suggesting Wren Hollis poses a threat," he said carefully, "present it now, before this council, rather than relying on vague suspicion regarding her circumstances." Roth hesitated, and Cade noted the brief flicker of uncertainty crossing his expression before it smoothed back into practiced composure. "I have no specific evidence at present, my king," Roth admitted. "Only concern for your safety, given the pattern of recent threats. Then your concern, while perhaps well-intentioned, remains speculation rather than substance," Cade said firmly, closing the discussion with the authority expected of his position. "This council will return to matters of actual governance." The meeting continued through remaining business, though tension lingered beneath the surface long after Roth's challenge had been formally dismissed. Cade noticed several council members exchanging careful glances throughout the remainder of the session, and he understood that whatever unified authority he had maintained over recent years had been subtly fractured by the public questioning of his judgment regarding Wren. Following the meeting, Owen approached him privately, his expression grave. "My lord," he said quietly, "Roth's public challenge concerns me beyond its immediate content. If he suspects we are investigating his involvement in the Queen's death, this could be a preemptive move, an attempt to discredit anyone close to you before we gather sufficient evidence against him." Cade considered this possibility carefully. "You believe he is trying to isolate me?" he asked. "Or eliminate a variable he cannot control," Owen said. "If Wren Hollis carries a secret significant enough to threaten his position, whether related to our current suspicions or something else entirely, Roth may be attempting to remove her from your trust before that secret can surface and complicate whatever plans he has already set in motion." The implications settled heavily over Cade as he made his way back toward his private chambers that evening, his mind circling between political strategy and a growing, urgent need to protect Wren from whatever danger Roth's maneuvering might represent. He found her in the smaller garden near the kitchens, sitting alone on a stone bench, her expression troubled in a way that suggested she had already heard whispers of the council's discussion. "You heard," he said, settling beside her. "The whole palace has heard, my lord," Wren said quietly. "Beta Roth does not whisper his concerns discreetly." "I dismissed his accusations without hesitation," Cade assured her. "You have nothing to fear from his suspicions." Wren was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "Perhaps he is not entirely wrong to be suspicious, my lord," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Cade turned to look at her directly, alarm flickering through his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. "There is something I have needed to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something I almost told you before we were interrupted, days ago. I fear that if I do not tell you now, before Roth or anyone else discovers it independently. The consequences may be far worse than if the truth comes from me directly. Cade felt his pulse quicken, uncertain whether he was prepared for whatever revelation was about to unfold, yet understanding that avoiding it any longer would serve neither of them well. "Tell me," he said gently. "Whatever it is, I promise you my judgment will not be clouded by fear or suspicion before I have heard the full truth." Ren took a steadying breath, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and determination that Cade had not seen from her before. "My lord," she began, "my true name is not simply Ren Hollis. I am the last surviving heir of the Hallow royal line, hidden and protected since the destruction of my family 18 years ago." The words landed like a physical blow, and Cade felt the careful foundation of his understanding shift dramatically beneath him. "The Hallow Pack," he said slowly, working through the implications even as he spoke them aloud. "The very territory whose aggressive border movements have concerned my council for months. You are their lost heir." "I did not know myself until recently," Ren said quickly, desperate for him to understand. "My guardian, the woman who raised me and passed away recently. She protected this secret my entire life, believing exposure would result in my death. I have lived every day since childhood believing myself simply forgotten, unremarkable, until she revealed the truth just before she died." Cade sat in stunned silence, processing the enormity of what she had just revealed. "If this became known," he said finally, "the political implications alone could reshape the entire regional balance of power. The Hallow Pack currently operates under leadership that seized control following your family's destruction. Your survival, if revealed, could be seen as a direct threat to their current authority, potentially triggering the very conflict my council has feared for months." "I understand the danger, my lord," Ren said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I understand that my presence near you now carries far greater risk than either of us realized when this began. If you wish for me to leave the palace, to disappear again as I have for most of my life, I will understand completely." Cade reached for her hand without hesitation, the decision made before he had fully considered its implications. "No," he said firmly. "Whatever complications your true identity creates, I will not send you away out of fear. We will face whatever consequences arise together, carefully and deliberately, but I will not lose you to caution alone." Ren's tears fell freely now, relief and fear tangled together as she gripped his hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "There is something else you should know," Cade said gently, deciding that trust required equal honesty from him as well. "My advisors suspect Beta Roth may have been involved in orchestrating my late wife's murder, potentially connected to a broader pattern of eliminating threats to consolidate his own influence. If your family's destruction 18 years ago was similarly orchestrated by someone seeking territorial or political advantage, it is possible these events are connected more directly than either of us initially suspected." Ren's expression shifted from fear to something sharper, more focused. "You believe Roth may have been involved in destroying my family as well?" she asked. "I do not know with certainty," Cade admitted, "but the pattern is troubling enough that we cannot dismiss the possibility. If Roth orchestrated both tragedies to secure influence over two separate territories, his ambitions extend far beyond what any of us initially imagined, and the danger to both of us grows more urgent with each passing day we remain uncertain of his true intentions." They sat together as darkness fell over the garden, two people carrying secrets and dangers neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed, now bound together by truths that threatened everything they had each built to survive within a kingdom growing more treacherous with each passing revelation. The hidden ledger fell open across Owen's desk, and every carefully constructed assumption about Beta Roth's loyalty collapsed within the first 3 pages. Owen had spent nearly 2 weeks quietly searching Roth's private study during hours when the Beta was occupied elsewhere, careful never to leave any trace of his investigation. He had finally succeeded that morning, discovering a locked compartment beneath a false floorboard that yielded documents Cade had hoped never to find, yet had known, somewhere beneath his careful denial, likely existed. The ledger detailed payments spanning nearly 2 decades, meticulously recorded in Roth's own precise handwriting. Early entries referenced arrangements with mercenary forces operating near the Hallow territory, dated almost exactly to the period surrounding the destruction of that royal household. Later entries tracked payments to individuals within the Ashcroft Palace itself, including sums transferred shortly before each of the 4 attempts on Cade's life, and a final, damning entry, dated the very night of Lyra's murder, referencing payment for what the ledger coldly termed removal of the primary obstacle. Cade stared at the evidence spread across his desk, feeling something cold and furious settle deep in his chest. 18 years, he said quietly. He orchestrated the destruction of an entire royal bloodline 18 years ago, and has spent every year since consolidating power through calculated violence against anyone who threatened his ambitions. The Hallow territory fell into chaos following their royal family's destruction, Owen confirmed grimly. Roth quietly arranged trade agreements and resource concessions with whoever seized control in the aftermath, securing personal wealth and influence that likely funded his subsequent activities here, including the elimination of your queen once he recognized her influence over you, might eventually threaten his growing control over palace affairs. Why target me directly then? Cade asked. If eliminating Lyra served his purposes, why continue attempting to end my life as well? A king consumed by grief is a king easily managed, Owen said carefully. But a king who begins healing, who regains clarity and strength, becomes a threat to whatever influence Roth has built through your prolonged vulnerability. I suspect each attempt on your life followed moments when your council members observed you regaining focus or challenging decisions Roth preferred to control unilaterally. Cade absorbed this horrifying clarity slowly, memories of the past 3 years reorganizing themselves around this new, devastating understanding. Roth's careful comfort during his grief, his steady expansion of authority over trade and border matters, his consistent presence at every juncture where Cade might have otherwise regained full control over his own kingdom, all of it now made a terrible, calculated sense. We must move carefully, Cade said finally, his voice hardening with determination rather than the raw grief that might once have overwhelmed him. This evidence alone may not survive scrutiny if Roth anticipates our investigation and moves to destroy remaining proof or flee before we can act. I agree, my lord, Owen said. I recommend we gather additional witnesses if possible, perhaps someone within Roth's household staff who might corroborate these financial records. Before we move to formal accusation, a premature confrontation risks allowing him to escape justice entirely. As they discussed strategy, a guard arrived urgently at the door, his expression tense with alarm. My lord, he said. Vader Roth requests an immediate private audience. He says the matter concerns the safety of someone close to you and cannot wait. Cade exchanged a troubled glance with Owen, both men recognizing the danger implicit in Roth's sudden urgency. He knows we are investigating him, Cade said quietly, or he suspects it strongly enough to act preemptively. Where is Ren currently? Owen asked, his own alarm rising to match Cade's. The kitchens, my lord. As of an hour ago, the guard reported. Cade rose immediately, decisive urgency replacing careful deliberation. Owen, secure her immediately, discreetly if possible, but do not hesitate if resistance arises. I will handle Roth directly. Owen departed swiftly, and Cade composed himself before receiving Roth in the smaller audience chamber adjacent to his private study, careful to maintain outward calm despite the fury and dread building within him. Roth entered with his usual measured composure, though Cade now recognized the careful performance beneath features he had once trusted implicitly. My king, Roth began, bowing with practiced deference, I fear I must bring troubling news. I have learned definitively that the Kitchen Omega you have grown close to carries a hidden identity that endangers this entire kingdom. You speak of Ren Hollis, Cade said evenly, giving nothing away. I have discovered she is in fact the surviving heir of the Hallow royal line, Roth continued, his tone carefully grave. A discovery that, I fear, means her presence here could provoke direct conflict with the current Hallow leadership, who believe that bloodline entirely extinguished. For the safety of your kingdom, I recommend she be quietly removed from the palace, and if necessary, handed over to Hallow authorities to prevent broader conflict. Cade felt cold fury settle into focused clarity. You mean handed over to be executed, he said flatly, just as her family was executed 18 years ago, on your orders. Roth's composure faltered for the first time, something genuine flickering behind his eyes before he masked it quickly. My king, I do not understand your accusation, he said carefully. I have seen the ledger, Roth, Cade said, his voice hardening with barely controlled rage. 18 years of payments, meticulously recorded in your own hand, the destruction of the Hallow royal family, my queen's murder, every attempt on my own life since. You have been orchestrating this kingdom's tragedies for nearly 2 decades to secure your own power. The color drained from Roth's face, and for a moment, Cade saw the calculated mask crack entirely, revealing something colder and more desperate beneath. You cannot prove any of this, Roth said, his voice tightening. I have proof enough to bring before this entire council, Cade said, and I have guards moving now to secure Ren's safety before whatever plan you intended to execute against her. Roth's expression shifted rapidly through several calculations, and Cade recognized, with sudden alarm, the the moment his former advisor decided that cooperation was no longer an option worth pursuing. Roth's hand moved swiftly toward a concealed blade at his side, and Cade barely managed to step back as the weapon flashed toward him, narrowly missing as he twisted away from the strike. "Guards!" Cade shouted, drawing his own blade as Roth pressed his attack with the desperate ferocity of a man who understood his years of careful deception had finally collapsed entirely. Their exchange was brief but intense, years of careful physical training on both sides evident in each calculated movement. Cade's guards burst through the chamber doors within moments, quickly overwhelming Roth despite his continued resistance, disarming him and forcing him to his knees before he could inflict any serious harm. "You will answer for everything," Cade said, breathing hard as guards secured Roth's restraints. 18 years of calculated murder ends today. Roth said nothing further, his expression settling into cold, resigned silence, as guards led him away toward the palace dungeons to await formal judgment before the full council. Cade remained in the chamber for a long moment afterward, processing the devastating truth that had finally surfaced after years of quiet suspicion and careful investigation. Owen returned shortly after, relief evident on his features. "Wren is secure, my lord," he reported. "We reached the kitchens before any harm could come to her, though several of Roth's personal guards attempted to intervene. They have been detained as well, and I believe further interrogation will confirm the full extent of his network within the palace." Cade nodded, exhaustion and relief washing over him in equal measure. "Take me to her," he said quietly. He found Wren in a secured chamber near the guard barracks, pale but unharmed, relief flooding her expression the moment she saw him enter safely. "My lord," she said, rising quickly. "I heard there was danger. Are you injured?" "I am unharmed," Cade assured her, crossing the room and taking her hands in his without hesitation. "Roth has been captured. The truth of his crimes, against your family, against my own, against this entire kingdom, will finally be brought before full justice." Wren's relief gave way to tears she no longer attempted to hide, and Cade pulled her gently into an embrace, the careful distance they had maintained for so long, finally dissolving entirely in the aftermath of danger survived together. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, and never again in hiding or in fear." Fire erupted along the dungeon corridor moments before the alarm bells began ringing across the palace grounds, and Cade knew immediately that Roth's capture had not ended the danger, only delayed its most desperate expression. He had been reviewing testimony gathered from Roth's captured guards when the first explosion shook the lower levels of the palace, smoke curling up through the stone corridors as shouts of alarm spread rapidly among the staff and soldiers stationed throughout the building. Owen burst into the chamber moments later, his face grim with urgency. "My lord," he said, breathing hard, "Roth's remaining allies have moved against us. They have breached the dungeon level and freed him. Several guards are down, and reports suggest they are moving toward the eastern wing, toward the chambers where Wren is currently secured." Cade's blood ran cold, every instinct sharpening into focused, desperate clarity. "How many?" he asked, already moving toward the door. "At least a dozen armed men," Owen reported, matching his pace. "Mercenaries by their equipment, likely part of the same network Roth has maintained for years to execute his schemes without direct traceable involvement." They moved swiftly through the palace corridors, gathering additional guards as they went, the sounds of combat growing louder as they approached the eastern wing. Cade's mind raced through possibilities, understanding that Roth, cornered and exposed, would now be operating from desperation rather than calculated patience, making him more dangerous and unpredictable than at any previous point in his long campaign of hidden violence. They reached the corridor outside Wren's secured chamber to find it already under assault, 3 mercenaries attempting to break through the reinforced door while 2 guards fought desperately to hold them back. Cade entered the fray immediately, his blade meeting the nearest attacker with practiced precision, honed through years of necessary vigilance against exactly this kind of threat. The combat was brutal and fast, corridors too narrow for extended maneuvering, forcing close, decisive engagement. Cade fought with a focused intensity he had not felt in years, every strike driven by the understanding that Wren's safety depended entirely on how quickly this threat could be neutralized. Owen fought beside him with equal determination, the 2 men moving with the coordinated efficiency of years spent training together. Within minutes, the immediate attackers outside Wren's chamber lay defeated or fled, but Owen's expression remained tense as he assessed their surroundings. "This was a diversion, my lord," he said grimly. "Roth would not risk everything on a single failed assault. He is likely attempting something else entirely while our attention focuses here." As if confirming Owen's suspicion, a guard arrived moments later, his expression frantic. "My lord," he reported, Beta Roth has been sighted moving toward the northern stables. It appears he intends to flee the palace grounds entirely, likely toward hallowed territory where he may believe himself protected by whatever arrangements he maintained with that pack's current leadership. Cade made his decision instantly. Owen, ensure Wren remains secured here with additional guards, he ordered. I am going after Roth myself. He does not escape justice after everything he has done. My lord, this could be exactly the diversion he intends, allowing him to separate you from your guard for a final, desperate strike, Owen warned. Then I will be ready for it, Cade said firmly, already moving toward the northern stables with a small contingent of guards following closely behind. They reached the stables to find chaos, horses spooked by the earlier explosions, stable hands scattered in confusion, and Roth himself, bloodied from his earlier confrontation with Cade but still moving with desperate determination, attempting to mount a horse for escape. He turned as Cade approached, recognizing immediately that his path to freedom had been cut off. It ends here, Roth, Cade said, blade drawn, guards fanning out to prevent any escape route. You will not stop the momentum I have already set in motion, Roth said, his composure entirely abandoned now, replaced by cold, calculating desperation. Even if you capture me here, my allies within the hallowed territory will use this opportunity to press their advantage against your weakened borders. Everything I built over 18 years does not simply disappear because you have finally caught up to the truth. Then we will face that consequence together, as a unified kingdom, rather than allowing your treachery to divide us further, Cade said, stepping closer despite Roth's clearly desperate state. Roth's expression twisted with something between fury and resignation, and in a final, reckless act, he lunged toward Cade with his remaining strength, blade flashing in a desperate attempt to end their confrontation permanently rather than face capture and judgment. Cade sidestepped the strike, years of training allowing him to read the desperate, uncontrolled nature of the attack, and countered swiftly, disarming Roth completely and forcing him to the ground with controlled, decisive force. Guards moved quickly to restrain him fully, and Cade stood over his former advisor, breathing hard from the confrontation, feeling the weight of 18 years of hidden violence finally reaching its conclusion. You will face full judgment before this council, and before whatever representatives from the hallowed territory can be gathered to address the crimes committed against that royal family as well, Cade said firmly. Roth said nothing further, his expression settling into cold silence as guards led him away under heavy restraint, this time with additional precautions taken to prevent any further escape attempts. Cade remained in the stable yard for a long moment, processing the exhausting conclusion of a threat that had shadowed his entire reign since Lyra's murder. He returned to the eastern wing to find Wren safe, though visibly shaken by the violence that had unfolded near her chamber during the assault. She rose immediately as he entered, relief flooding her expression as she took in his presence, exhausted but unharmed. You went after him yourself, she said, a mixture of admiration and worry in her voice. I could not allow him to escape and continue threatening everything we have both fought to protect, Cade said, crossing the room to take her hands gently in his own. He has been captured fully now, along with his remaining network within the palace. The immediate danger has passed. Wren's tension finally eased, and she allowed herself to lean into him, the exhaustion of the day's violence catching up to both of them in the sudden quiet that followed. I was so afraid, she admitted softly. Not for myself alone, but for you. Facing him directly when I understood how dangerous he had become once cornered. I could not risk allowing him to escape, knowing what that would mean for your safety, and for the stability of this entire kingdom, Cade said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Whatever comes next, in the aftermath of everything that has happened today, we will face it together, exactly as I promised you before. In the days that followed, the full extent of Roth's network was uncovered and dismantled. Guards and staff members who had participated in his schemes brought before formal judgment alongside their former leader. Representatives from the hallowed territory were contacted regarding the truth of their royal family's destruction, the revelation of Wren's survival creating significant political complexity that would require careful, patient diplomacy in the months ahead. Yet amid all this complicated aftermath, Cade found himself experiencing something he had believed permanently lost to him following Lyra's death. A genuine, steady hope for a future no longer shadowed entirely by grief and hidden threat. Wren remained close throughout the difficult weeks of investigation and diplomatic negotiation that followed, her presence a constant, steadying comfort as Cade worked to restore stability to a kingdom finally freed from the calculated treachery that had haunted it for nearly 2 decades. Snow had begun falling over the palace grounds the morning Cade Ashcroft called an emergency assembly of his full council. and every advisor present understood immediately that something significant was about to be announced. The past several weeks had transformed the kingdom in ways few could have anticipated. Beta Roth's trial had concluded swiftly once the full weight of evidence against him was presented. His conviction for the murders of both Queen Lyra and the entire Hallow royal family met with grim satisfaction among a council finally freed from his hidden manipulation. His execution had been carried out quietly, a necessary conclusion to 18 years of calculated violence that had shaped the kingdom's darkest moments. Diplomatic efforts with the Hallow territory had progressed more smoothly than Cade initially feared. Once presented with undeniable evidence of Roth's involvement in their royal family's destruction, alongside proof of Ren's legitimate survival and claim to that bloodline, the current Hallow leadership, itself uncertain and eager to avoid further conflict, had agreed to formal negotiations regarding the territory's future governance. Ren, drawing on strength and clarity that surprised even herself, had participated directly in these negotiations, advocating for a peaceful transition that honored her family's memory without demanding destabilizing reclamation of territory that had moved forward under different leadership for nearly 2 decades. Now, standing before his assembled council on this quiet winter morning, Cade prepared to address a matter that had occupied his private thoughts as fully as any political concern of recent weeks. "I have called you together today for a matter beyond the usual affairs of state," Cade began, his voice carrying the steady confidence that had returned to him gradually since Roth's defeat. "For 3 years I ruled this kingdom believing myself incapable of ever again opening my heart to another person, convinced that love itself represented a vulnerability I could not afford to carry alongside the weight of this crown." The council remained attentive, several members exchanging curious glances as Cade continued. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Ren Hollis, whom many of you have come to know these past weeks as the rightful surviving heir of the Hallow royal line, has shown me that strength and vulnerability are not opposing forces, but rather complementary truths that allow a person, and a king, to remain whole even in the face of profound loss." He gestured, and Ren entered the chamber, dressed simply but with a quiet dignity that had settled naturally over her in recent weeks. Her presence no longer that of a forgotten kitchen omega, but of a woman who had claimed her rightful place with courage and grace. She crossed to stand beside Cade, and the council members rose respectfully, understanding now the full significance of this gathering. "I intend to take Ren Hollis as my mate and queen," Cade announced, his voice clear and unwavering. "Not merely for the political stability this union may provide between our territories, though I do not deny that benefit exists, but because she has given me back a piece of myself I believed permanently lost. I ask this council's blessing, though I will proceed regardless, out of respect for the years many of you have served this kingdom faithfully." A murmur passed through the assembled advisors, quickly settling into genuine warm approval as council members who had witnessed Cade's transformation over recent weeks recognized the truth and rightness of this announcement. Several offered immediate words of congratulation, understanding that their king's happiness, so long denied, represented not weakness but a return to the vitality that had once defined his reign before grief and hidden treachery had clouded it so completely. Ren, standing beside him, felt the weight of the moment settle over her, gratitude and wonder mingling with the quiet confidence she had built through recent weeks of facing challenges she never could have anticipated when she first arrived at these palace gates as an anonymous kitchen worker, seeking simple, honest work. Following the council's formal acknowledgement, Cade and Ren walked together through the palace corridors, the winter sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate halls that had once felt cold and heavy with unspoken grief, now filled with a lightness neither had believed possible just months earlier. "Do you have any regrets?" Cade asked as they walked, pausing near a window overlooking the snow-covered gardens where their earliest conversations had first taken root. "About any of this? The complications your true identity has brought, the danger we have both faced, the weight of ruling not merely this kingdom but eventually the delicate peace between our territories." Ren considered the question seriously, though her answer came without hesitation. "No regrets," she said softly. "I spent 18 years believing myself forgotten, invisible, someone with no history worth acknowledging and no future worth anticipating. You saw me, truly saw me, before you ever knew the truth of who I was, and that recognition gave me the courage to eventually embrace both my past and whatever future awaits us now." Cade reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers with a tenderness that had become natural between them over recent weeks. "I swore, standing over Lyra's grave, that I would never again allow myself to love so completely," he admitted. "I believed that closing myself off represented strength, that grief demanded permanent armor rather than eventual healing. And now," Ren asked gently, Now I understand that true strength lies not in refusing to feel, but in choosing to open yourself again despite every reason for caution, Cade said. You taught me that lesson simply by smiling at me on an evening when I believed myself entirely beyond reach of warmth or hope. They stood together at the window for a long moment, watching snow continue to fall softly over grounds that had witnessed both tragedy and, finally, genuine hope for a future neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed within a palace kitchen months earlier. The wedding took place as winter began giving way to early signs of spring, a celebration far grander than either had initially anticipated, drawing representatives not only from across the Ashcroft territory, but from the Hallow Lands as well, a symbolic gesture of the peace their union represented between two territories, once divided by hidden treachery and unspoken suspicion. The Great Hall, once the site of Cade's first marriage and the devastating grief that followed, was transformed for this new celebration, filled with warmth and genuine joy that seemed to erase, at least for this significant day, the shadows that had haunted these halls for so many years. Cade watched Wren approach through the assembled guests, dressed in gowns befitting both her rightful heritage and the queen she was about to formally become, and felt none of the fear or hesitation that had once convinced him love itself represented unacceptable vulnerability. Instead, he felt only quiet, steady certainty that this moment, this choice, represented exactly the healing he had needed after years of believing himself permanently broken by loss. As they exchanged their vows before the assembled kingdom, Cade found himself thinking not of the grief that had once defined his reign, but of the quiet courage Wren had shown throughout every challenge they had faced together. From her first hesitant smile in his private study, to the strength she had demonstrated navigating the complicated truth of her own royal heritage. She had given him back something he believed permanently lost, and in return, he intended to spend the remainder of his reign ensuring she never again felt forgotten or invisible within a world that had once dismissed her so completely. The kingdom that emerged from this union proved stronger and more stable than it had been in years, the peace negotiated between the Ashcroft and Hallow territories holding firm, as both peoples recognized the genuine commitment their rulers held toward justice and reconciliation, rather than continued division. Wren's presence brought fresh perspective to matters of governance, her understanding of what it meant to survive as someone forgotten and overlooked in forming policies that better served the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens. And Cade, once a king who had sworn never to love again, found himself each morning grateful for the forgotten Omega whose simple, genuine smile had somehow reached through years of carefully constructed grief, to remind him that healing, however unexpected its arrival, remained possible even for hearts that believed themselves permanently broken beyond repair.